Hey there folks, Joe DiSanto here with another exciting tax-related video. Alright, we're going to talk about doing some 1099s because they're due in like a week, so I figured there'd be a lot of people hungry for 1099 content. Can you be hungry for 1099 content? I don't know. Anyway, this video is specifically about creating 1099s like with a third-party website. You know, like if you use QuickBooks or QuickBooks Online, it has some tools built into the software to help making your 1099s kind of easier. It's like all built in. And I do have a video about making them with QuickBooks, and it's definitely simpler. However, you know, not everyone uses QuickBooks, or not everyone has, you know, the need to make that many 1099s. Like in my case, I, as you may know, am what they call a solopreneur now. And I'm like an independent consultant. I have an S Corp. I do a business tax return, and I do pay some independent contractors throughout the year to help me. And I have to generate a few 1099s. But as you know from watching my content, I'm a big Quicken person. I don't use QuickBooks for my business because it's not necessary and I don't want to spend the money. I do my S Corp finances all in Quicken alongside my personal finances, and then I just generate appropriate reports and data from that. However, I do need to make those 1099s I mentioned, so I'll take some information from Quicken from my reporting, and I'll figure out what vendors I have that I need to pay 1099s to, and then I'll go out and I'll use this third-party service. I use Tax 1099 to generate the 1099 and have them electronically file it. So we're going to look directly at Tax 1099 right now. I'm going to show you how to set it up and use it and how to submit a 1099. Okay, see you in there. And actually, I'm just going to hit a button here and make myself really small. There we go. Okay, so I'm currently logged into Tax 1099 to the dashboard here. And just, you know, FYI, if you just go to the website, you're going to get something like this. You know, you can hit sign up, and you know, you put in your email, password, blah blah blah, and it's a free account. You know, follow a couple steps, and then you're going to end up here at this kind of dashboard, and you might end up actually here. Now, I will admit, I've been tinkering around in doing some stuff on Tax 99 today, and I've logged out and logged back in, and like the dashboard looked different. It was like they updated it, you know, and it was like they had just released the update while I was using it. So hopefully it looks like this. It should. If it doesn't, it might look a little bit different, but the, you know, process is the same and the underworkings are the same. I like this view better, honestly. But we're in my Tax 1099 account here, and you might think, hey, I'm setting up a Tax 1099 account for my business, and the first thing I'm going to do is put in all my business info, and then that's going to populate the 1099s, you know, as the payer. And that this user and login is strictly for my business alone. That's actually not how it works. This login is sort of a general login for me as a user. Like I might be the owner of the business and it's the only business I'm going to do 1099s for. Or I could be like, you know, a CFO or bookkeeper and I'm doing 1099s for a few companies. I could set up multiple companies in here. And let me show you what I mean. Like, generally speaking, we're just going to cover the 1099 NEC, which is non-employee compensation, and 1099 miscellaneous, which is like also a 1099, but you use that one specifically for rent and like legal fees and a couple of minimal things. So we're going to make, you know, we're only going to use these. Actually, I'm just going to do one here, so I'm going to use the 1099 NEC. So if I go in here to make a 1099, this is kind of the place we'll be making it. Where I start is the payer's name. Now, if I click this, we're going to see my business in here as a drop down, okay? Because I've already entered it. But I could add another payer, like one of my other clients, and say, oh yeah, I'm going to make, you know, 1099s for my business, but also one of my clients. So I'm going to add another payer. And for each 1099 form I make, I choose the payer and the recipient. So if you're starting out, you're just going to put in your company's info. You would hit new payer. You would fill in the info, and in this case, I'm paying from a business. I have an S corp. You might be paying from an individual because you're an independent contractor and you hire some subcontractors, but you just hire them as you as your name. You don't have a business, but you still need to do a 1099 if you want the deduction. So in that case, you would choose paying as an individual. I'm doing the business. I put in my EIN, my business name. This disregarded entity is essentially referring to like a doing business as. So if I kind of operate as Business Papers Inc., Play Louder, I would put Play Louder in there. I actually pay everyone just for my Business Papers account, so I'm not going to put that in. I also get your address, zip, all that, phone, your email for them to email you with any questions or issues. And then down here, this is confusing. It says withholding state tax ID. Now, some of their labels are not super clear. I'm just going to cover what I think this is. Like when you hire an independent contractor, you're not doing tax withholdings, right? But sometimes you might, especially like sometimes I've gotten notices from the IRS from vendors over the years that had, IRS liens or, and they reach out to whomever they maybe has hired them in the past and say, hey, these people owe me money. We're going to put, we're going to have you withhold some money from their independent contractor pay and send it to us. In that case, you might have done some withholding, and there is a place on the 1099 here. But there's only one ID to put in. I'm in Florida. I do have an employer tax ID for my own payroll. So potentially what I would put in here is my unemployment insurance state tax ID account number in here. But honestly, there's no reason for it because I haven't done any withholding to any recipient in Florida, and it would only relate to a recipient in Florida because I don't have accounts in other states. So I just leave that blank. Maybe it's relevant to you. If it is, you might need to do a little bit more research. This last filing is if you're going to close your business down and this is the last year you're filing. Client payer ID, I don't even know what this is. I don't put anything in. It's optional. But so anyway, I would fill in my info and hit add. And once you add your company, you're going to have your company in here in the drop-down list. So if I select my company, you see it populates a certain amount of the form. Now, the nomenclature here is that as my user and login, I am creating forms. Each form is a 1099 from a payer to a recipient. And again, I can have multiple payers here and of course multiple recipients. Now, I will say, if I were you, if you're like like sort of a bookkeeper or have clients and you're thinking, oh, that actually helps me. I'll put in multiple clients in here. I would not do that. I have an account for each client because you're going to put in information in Tax 99 that very likely you're going to use next year and use the year after. And if you no longer have that client, you want to be able to pass on their user and password. So just to make their life easier, like, hey, going forward, this is where I've done your 1099s. Next year, you can go in there and most of the recipients, you sent 1099s to last year, all their info is already entered in there. If you put in a bunch of companies under one user and login, no one else is going to be going there because you don't want intercompany sharing and stuff. So just a thought. But anyway, we are making forms, a form for each recipient for the year 2024, and that's how we got here. So some of you may be watching this as the second part of a video about making 1099s if you use Quicken. Okay, I'm kind of like using this video for two videos, whether you use Quicken or you don't. So if you're watching that video, we ended off with me making this spreadsheet off some Quicken data. I've changed the description or the payee here name to be example because I want it to line up with my example W9. If you're just watching the 1099, tax99.com alone video, don't worry about what I just said. I guess I'll just lead into the fact that prior to doing these 1099s, you need to know, one, who you're giving a 1099 to, and have a sum total dollar value you've sent them, okay? And you also need to have their W-9 so that you have the correct information to put in. Now, I'll quickly do a little recap of like what the W-9 means. Now, you get the W-9 not only to get the address and tax ID and information for making a 1099, but the tax classification that people share with you on the 1099 will determine whether or not you even need to give them a 1099. Long short, if they're a corp or whatever .inc, C corp or S corp, no 1099. If they're an LLC that's taxed as a C corp or S corp, no 1099. If they're just an individual to their name and social, 1099. If they're an LLC that's a single owner LLC by an individual, they get taxed essentially as a disregarded entity, sole proprietor, they get a 1099. If they're an LLC taxed as a partnership right here, they get a 1099. So those are the requirements for who gets a 1099, and then also the last criteria is you only give 1099s to people you've paid from a bank account or Venmo or Zelle or something like that. If you've paid a vendor with a credit card, you do not need to give them a 1099 because the credit card company gives that person a 1099. If you paid a vendor just randomly half with a credit card throughout the year and half from your bank, you would give them a 1099, but only for the amount of money that you sent them from the bank. If you paid people with PayPal and you used a business account to pay them, like you pay for the PayPal business account, you don't need to give them a 1099. PayPal will give them a 1099. If you paid them using a personal PayPal account and you need to generate a 1099 for the deduction, and you paid them with a personal PayPal, you will have to give them a 1099 because PayPal will only give 1099s, for official business accounts. Okay, that was quick. Sorry, I went fast because I covered that in the Quicken portion. Okay, so right here, I got a spreadsheet, some data I pulled out of my Quicken. I came up with this one example payee that I'm going to give a 1099 for $3,050. I have their quote-unquote example tax ID, W-9 here. So what I'm going to do now is I've already put in my payer information, which is me. Now I'm going to put in the receiver information or the recipient information. So you would go here to go to add recipient, and you're going to fill in similar information. Maybe you're giving a 1099 to a business with a 9-digit business tax ID like this here. Maybe you're giving it to an individual, the social security number. People are required by law to give you a W-9, and you're required by law to send a 1099 when you have to. Some people just refuse to send you their W-9 and you don't have their info. If you have their name and address, you can still give them a 1099 using tax1099.com. They give you this option to say TIN not provided. It's funny, in QuickBooks, you don't have that option. They won't let you send a 1099 if you don't have a tax ID. So in here, you could send one if they haven't provided, and maybe they try to match it up with people through some database. I don't know. Business name, attention, address. Now, with tax1099.com, it will give you the option to mail and email the 1099. So you don't necessarily need an email address in here. But I recommend you get an email address from everybody and you do the mail and the email just to cover your bases. Even when you send it to both, so many people are just, allergic to paperwork. They ignore it all, and then when they go to do the tax return, they'll just email you and be like, hey, can I get my 1099? In which case, I used to gripe about that all the time, but now I just I download PDFs of all the 1099s and I just email it to them. I just go with the universe in that, man, because otherwise it'll just make you crazy. But get their address. You can check it to validate with the USPS. I would do that to make sure it's deliverable. Phone, you don't need the phone. Email, you definitely want. You select the language and so on. Now I entered, even though this is kind of a fake example in here, my example recipient based on the 1099. You see, the W-9. You see the name, address. I popped in there. I got their recipient TIN. I actually made up a number. So let's assume this is. No, I can't edit that now. But I made up this number. Actually, oh, now I can edit it here. I'll just for whatever I went. I don't know, 4, 5, 6. 3, 2, 1, 4. Okay, so as you can see here, it doesn't show the whole TIN, but the last 4 digits kind of match. This is my taxpayer ID, though. I'm gonna blur that out of paranoia or whatever. And what else? The next move we have to do is say, how much did we pay them? How much employee compensation we give them? In this case, I'm going to my spreadsheet because I'm using Quicken here. So Quicken doesn't have an integration for 1099s like QuickBooks does, but Quicken is, a very small fraction of the price. So I have to export some data out of Quicken at the end of the year, tally it up, and make my own total. I pop that in here, right? And what that's going to do is it's going to populate this state income box. Now, the state income thing is a little weird. Most states, like Tax 1099, when it transmits the federal 1099, most states allow it to just send a digital copy of the same thing to the state, and the state's covered. You've covered the state and the Fed. And so they put in this amount here to the state income box. Now, in this case, this place is this fake recipient is California, and California will accept that digital filing to the state, and they'll just use my federal tax ID as my state number. Some states don't accept that, or they require you to have your own number for the state, which you very likely wouldn't. So it can get a little tricky if you just have a lot of states, different people in different states, and you gotta cover a lot of states. And I'll be honest with you, I send 1099s to like a couple states. They accept the digital transmission, and they use my federal tax ID as my identifier, and it's easy. I've looked up a couple of things, and it's funny, I found these good resources on other websites that do 1099s. So I'm giving a shout out to Track 1099. I'm sorry I'm not using you, Track 1099, but if you're watching this and you haven't started yet, maybe you look at using Track 1099. It's probably the same thing. But in this case, what I wrote in here is, like it says, do you need a state filing? I just did, a search about state filings. It had this handy thing where you put in the payer state, the recipient state, the form, and look, it says no additional state filings required. Nice, I like that. Then I did a search for like what is a state payer's number, and it varies state by state, and every state uses different terminology for what this number really is. I believe it's actually the same number that I was telling you about that I have for Florida. It's basically the employer's state payroll account tax ID number, where if you do payroll in that state and you hold back taxes, it's all connected with your payroll withholding number. I believe that is the number. So like if I look at this form here, it says the California number is this format. I know that is the California employer payroll tax ID number format. So possibly the number you might need to put in here, if you have it, is your state company payroll tax ID number. But you would only have that likely in states that you do payroll. So if you don't have that for a state and they require it to be on here, you might get some kickback, in which case you actually even have to delete the state income. Look, see, it says state income is required. But I don't know, maybe you have to, we'll see. You'll have to see on a per state basis what happens, I guess. And you might need to essentially do some additional research. And what I did read was that in some cases, if the states don't take the digital transmittal, you have to basically download a PDF of the 1099s and go to the state website, set up an account, and upload them. So essentially what you're doing with these 1099s is you're telling the Fed, or you're telling the state, I paid this person X amount of money, so if you don't see it being reported on their tax return, you know, go call them and be like, hey, you're underreporting your income, you know. It's funny, some recipients think they get 1099s so that someone's doing the bookkeeping for them. You know, I'll get calls being like, hey, I need my 1099 so I know like what to put in my tax return. Like, otherwise I have no idea how much money I made. And you're like, well, that's not the point of the 1099, but I'm glad it's helping you. So anyway, we have done entering the info here. We got the payer information, the pay information, the amount, state income. It knows that this state income is California related. And we can either hit save and add new 1099 NEC, which will basically bring up a new form to create. Or we could say save and add new form, which was going to take you back to the form selection place where you could do an NEC or a miss or whatever. Or you could hit save and continue. Look at this. You have selected a state ID and state income is mandatory. Please enter the state ID. I recalled that what it did for the state ID automatically was just entered my tax ID with no dash. So I'm going to put that back in. We're going to hit save and continue. Okay, so now what it brings us to is what we're at now is this area, view, edit, and submit forms. So if I clicked on that and I selected tax year and I selected me as the payer, it's going to bring up all the forms that I have made here, right? You're going to see there are two here for my example company. I'm going to delete this one just to avoid confusion. So this is the form I just made. And what we're going to do here is we're going to submit it, essentially. We're going to select the form, and there might be more here. You might select them all. And then you're going to select here, send it via USPS mail, also e-deliver it if there was an email address. The TIN match is the service doing its best to go out and trying to find a way to match the tax ID with the either entity or the person. Because if you enter the tax ID wrong, it's going to get kicked back and you have to do a correction. So it does this service to try to eliminate you putting in incorrect tax ID information for the person or the entity. I don't know how good of a job it does, but I always select that, and I usually get an email saying your 10 match worked. So I don't know. I like that. And then over here, I do state filing. Now, this is grayed out because as you saw from this, there is no additional state filing that is required, I guess, which is kind of weird because it did say California that information has to be in there, and we had it in there. But at some point, I just go, okay, I've got as much information as I have in there. It's letting me file it. So I go a little bit with, hoping the system has some checks and balances in it. And then we go submit for this payer. And then here it's going to say I've reviewed and verified the data for submission. So, but I'm going to actually, check off that because this is fake, right? I don't want to send this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to queue up a real 1099 and I'm going to submit it, and then I'm going to show you that screen. So I'm going to do an edit right here. Okay, so I hit this and it says select an option. Would you like to proceed with real-time TIN matching? I don't really know what that is. I'm going to say not required because that seems to be new. Then it's going to bring me over here and it's going to say, hey, how do you want to pay for this? I'm going to add a card here. So I'll add my card and I'll pay. And so I'm going to do that, and then I'll show you the next screen. Okay, so I've paid and this is what I get. Your return has been submitted. We'll email you the status, blah, blah, blah. You can see the complete filing history here. Forms, email address, blah, blah, blah. You can read that. So what ends up happening is you do get an email saying, hey, you know, your tin match worked. Your stuff's off and running. Congratulations. And then eventually, once you get all your 1099s done, I have a few more to do, so I'm only doing one here for this video. You can come back to, log back in, look at your dashboard, and you can go to Forms, and you can go View, Edit, Forms, do this whole thing, and then you can select it, and then you can download a PDF of all the forms together. And I always do that. Any 1099s I make, I download them all. I keep them, you know, for obviously tax purposes. As I said, many people eventually email asking for PDFs. You just email them the PDF, that's fine. And then I provide my CPA with copies of them so they know all the ones that I sent out. But, you know, I make them myself. Truth, you know, speaking of CPA, I could pay my CPA to do it, but the reality is I gotta add up and aggregate all the information for them to do it anyway, and you know they charge me probably $200 plus, you know, for like a minimum number, and then everything over like 6, it's like I don't know, $20, you know. So it could end up, you know, so doing it yourself, especially when you have like 1 or 2, saves you a lot of time. If I had a ton, I still might do it myself, because once, as I said previously, once you put the payer, you know, recipient info in here, it's already in here for next time. Next year, come around, you log in, you just bang, bang, bang. It's like not too many steps, and you know you can do it. Then you have easily have your PDF copies, and that is that. So hopefully that's helpful. I always say that. I'm sure it is, because if you didn't know how to do it, now you do. Okay, talk to you later.